At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to talk about the semiconductor shortage in the automotive industry. But instead of complaining about how it's caused havoc over the past couple of years, I'm here to talk about a solution that Volkswagen Australia has brought to the table. Said solution comes in the form of this, which is a Tiguan Allspace Monochrome, which starts from around $62,000 drive away and is kind of like a stripped down Tiguan Allspace that avoids using the parts that are in short supply so that Australian customers can actually get their hands on a car now rather than joining a long queue. But before we waste any more time talking about what this thing is, let's dive into the nitty gritty of it and see what the good parts are and then also what the parts are that I don't really enjoy. Chasing cars. Honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
Firstly, I want to talk about what's under the bonnet of this Tiguan Allspace Monochrome, because it's Volkswagen's famous E888 engine, the petrol 2-litre turbocharged one, but in this case, it's the 162TSI form, which is not only the most in-demand engine in the Tiguan range, but it also gives it a hefty amount of shunt on the road. So the sister car of this Tiguan Allspace Monochrome in Volkswagen Australia's whole avoiding this part shortage solution thing is the Tiguan Allspace Adventure. And that's quite an interesting vehicle because it's still based on the long wheelbase Allspace model, but it only gets 5 seats, which will appeal to some people, I guess. On the other hand, this Monochrome still retains 7 seats, so you've got room for the whole family. But best of all, there's the fact that Australian buyers can actually get their hands on these cars. So Volkswagen Australia has confirmed that they're bringing in 500 of these long wheelbase Allspace Monochrome models and then 500 of the short wheelbase Monochrome models between now and the end of Q1 in 2023. So whether you just want to go and get one or you already have an order for a Tiguan 162TSI and you don't want to wait, change to one of these and you can get it a lot sooner. So on the not so good points, in creating this Tiguan Allspace Monochrome, cloth manual seats are standard, meaning leather power seats aren't an option. And usually us car enthusiasts get giddy over the idea of manual cloth seats, but in a 7-seat SUV where every kg doesn't really matter for performance, I don't know, it just feels like a bit of a disappointment in an otherwise very premium cabin. Another element that is a bit of a disappointment, but I mean it's nothing new, is Volkswagen's love of those haptic touch panels. You've got them bordering the infotainment system, all the climate controls are the kind of weird touch panel things that you can slide your fingers up and down, but are quite a pain to use while trying to keep your eyes on the road. And then lastly, the multi-function steering wheel, all haptic touch panels. This one doesn't actually have a steering wheel heater, but that might be a victim of that part shortage. On the bright side, you're not going to be heating up your hands unwillingly while trying to perform a 3-point turn. And lastly, if you're a fan of bright colours, then this might not be the Tiguan for you. You can have it in grey, silver or black, and also white, but you're going to have to pay an extra $900 for that. But then again, with a name like Monochrome, what would you expect? So, on the design front, this Monochrome edition is very similar to a standard Tiguan, but it is wearing a black pack, meaning that the grille, bumper inserts, roof rails, wing mirrors, they're all black. It also wears a set of blacked out 19-inch wheels, which is an interesting point to raise because that aforementioned Allspace Adventure rides on 17s, meaning it probably gets better ride quality. But these 19s are the same ones that the regular Tiguan R-Line wears, and the ride's pretty good, but we'll get into that later. Despite this Tiguan Allspace Monochrome being pitched as sort of a stripped down Tiguan, the inside is still a very nice place to be and feels very premium. There's soft touch materials, I mean almost everywhere. You've got on the doors, on the dash, there's this strange kind of carbon look paneling with ambient lighting. Down here there is hard plastic, but I mean that can be forgiven because this area is also privy to scratches and dents and stuff, so it's probably for the best that it's a hardy sort of rubbery material. In terms of technology, you get an 8-inch infotainment screen with the weird kind of touch button things around the side of it. It gets navigation as standard, as well as wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is a big bonus in my eyes. In terms of the digital cluster, it measures 10.25 inches in width, and it's the standard Volkswagen operating system, which is great to use. As I mentioned before, cloth seats are the only option when it comes to this Monochrome, which is a little strange because they don't quite match the leather-covered premium nature of the rest of the cabin, including this fantastic perforated leather multifunction steering wheel, but they're still very comfortable and they've got the cool R pattern on it, which kind of hints at performance. Not that this car is overly quick, but hey, everyone likes to think they're driving an R car, right? One element that this monochrome does miss out on is a premium audio system, which might be a bit of a bummer for the audiophiles among us, but then again, the standard system that this Tiguan Allspace comes with will be fine for most. Another added bonus that you wouldn't expect on a stripped down model like this is the wireless phone charger. And speaking of, in that area, you get a pair of USB-C charging ports and a 12-volt outlet. And I can't go past the fact that the Tiguan still has a good old-fashioned big shifter and hasn't gone to the weird kind of almost punishing little tab that a lot of Volkswagen products have. As for practicality on the inside of this monochrome, it's pretty generous. The door bins are large. You get a pair of cup holders here that have Volkswagen's cool kind of cup holding mechanism thing that comes out and surrounds it. And then as for the center console bin, it's not overly big, but it has got Volkswagen's ratchet function, meaning that it doubles as an adjustable armrest. Back here in the second row of the Tiguan Allspace monochrome, space is actually reasonably plentiful with a generous amount of both head and leg room. Sitting in this middle seat shouldn't be much of a problem for most because it isn't actually too raised compared to either of these side seats, but the floor might prove to be a bit of an issue in the fact there's quite a large raised transmission tunnel running through the centre of the car, so you're going to have to awkwardly straddle that. The premium feeling of the cabin also carries through the second row with soft touch materials reasonably plentiful. I mean, you've got it on the armrest and the door card, but one thing I did notice is in the front, this material here, it's soft leather, whereas in the case of the second row, hard scratchy plastic, which is a bit of a disappointment in my eyes. In terms of amenities back here in the second row, Tri-Zone climate control is actually standard on this Tiguan Allspace monochrome, meaning not only do rear seat passengers get air vents and fan control, but they also get temperature control. And the other amenities include a USB-C charging port and a 12-volt socket. It's also worth noting that a sunroof is optional with this monochrome edition and will cost an extra $2,100. But because there are only 500 of these cars coming to Australia, it's not really a factory fitted option in the fact that you're not going to be able to order it from Germany. So after talking to Volkswagen Australia, they revealed that around half of these monochrome edition cars are fitted with a sunroof, so you're going to have to be in quick for that option. There are no two ways about it. Back here in the third row of the Tiguan Allspace, space is very tight. This is somewhat remedied by the fact that that second row has tilt and slide functionality, so you can move those seats a little bit more forward to get some legroom at least, but that still doesn't help the fact that my head is right up against the roof and I can't actually straighten my back. Another premium aspect the monochrome misses out on is a power tailgate, so you're going to have to make do with a manual one, but that's not the end of the world. As I mentioned before, 7 seats are standard, and in terms of luggage capacity, with all 3 rows in place, there's 230 litres of space. This jumps to 700 litres with the third row folded, and then with both rows folded down, you get access to 1,775 litres of space. It's also worth noting that a space-saver spare tyre sits beneath the boot, and in terms of towing, this Tiguan Allspace monochrome is rated to a brake capacity of 2.5 tonnes. Volkswagen claims a combined fuel economy figure of 8.6 litres per 100 kilometres when it comes to this Tiguan Allspace monochrome. During testing, the best figure that we could manage was 9 litres per 100 kilometres, which isn't too far off Volkswagen's claims, but it's also probably representative of the back road driving that we are doing during the test. And it's also worth noting that this monochrome needs 95 octane to run, so in the long run, it might be a bit more expensive than some of its competitors. In terms of servicing, Volkswagen Australia's care plan will cover this vehicle for up to 5 years or 75,000 kilometres and cost $2,950. Service intervals every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres. And it's also worth noting that this car here is covered under Volkswagen Australia's 5-year or unlimited kilometre warranty. Over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $1,095 to comprehensively insure their new Volkswagen Tiguan. Your premium may vary based on things that insurers take into account, such as your age, driving history, where you live, and whether or not you garage the car. As I mentioned before, this Tiguan is powered by Volkswagen's 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, and in this guise, it makes 162 kilowatts and 315 Nm of torque. A 7-speed dual-clutch transmission sends power to all 4 wheels via Volkswagen's 4Motion all-wheel drive system. For this Tiguan Allspace, a 0 to 100 time of 6.8 seconds feels pretty spot on, because while 162 kilowatts isn't a lot by modern means, this thing's pretty quick, and for a family-friendly 7-seat SUV that's not overly big and only has 4 cylinders, I'd say it's quite fast, so I'm impressed. As with most Volkswagens powered by this 2-litre turbocharged engine, torque is reasonably plentiful across the rev range, but drivers aren't really rewarded with revving the engine out, as that DSG is quite fond of short shifting and seems happy to do its own thing. One thing I have noticed, and it's not just a Tiguan, it's every car with a dual clutch transmission, at quite low speeds when you're sort of manoeuvring into car parks or just making 3-point turns, etc., the dual clutch can feel quite clunky, and as it's, I guess, trying to disengage the clutch and engage different gears, it feels like it's almost not calibrated properly, which I know isn't the case, but it's just something to notice when cars like, I guess, the Kia Seltos have moved away from a dual clutch into automatic. It is something you notice in these cars. As is the theme a lot with this monochrome edition, though it is marketed as a stripped out kind of car, it actually comes with Volkswagen's active chassis control, which means that it gets an assortment of drive modes for drivers to choose from on the road. The most normal ones you'll find yourself using are Eco, Normal or Sport, and things aren't too different between those modes, but as we've seen in other Volkswagens, Audis and Cupras, etc., Sport really tightens things up, and it's impressive because the transmission will hold gears for longer and the steering gets firmer, but the biggest noticeable difference on this front is how the suspension tightens up and reduces body roll. Speaking of suspension, the ride, it's nice for the majority of the time. You can't complain. It's probably not as nice as that Allspace Adventure that rides on the smaller 17-inch wheels, but then again, the 19-inch appointment on this car, it makes sense, and I'd say 90% of the time, most people will have no issue at all with this ride. The only time I wouldn't even say issue, the only time I've found that it gets a bit busy is when the road gets really rough, but even then, the cabin is so well insulated that the noise barely transfers through, and the seats are comfortable enough to, disguise the roughness. Another positive point I've noticed whilst driving this Tiguan is how tight the handling is for a 7-seat SUV. Now, I know it's not really in the same segment as the likes of the Everest or the Pathfinder and those full-size 7-seat SUVs, but even still, for something that can transport more than 4 kids at once, it's still really impressive, and the way it holds the road, especially in sport mode, with its very direct steering, I'm blown away, to be honest. But as is symptomatic with most SUVs, road feedback is almost non-existent through the steering wheel, and the traction levels aren't communicated very well, so you're somewhat left to guess what's happening up front, which is a vague feeling that doesn't inspire confidence in the drive. But on the topic of traction, wheel slip is almost non-existent with this 4Motion system in play, and off the line, you wouldn't expect it with an all-wheel drive SUV anyway, but that 350 Newton meters isn't really enough to overpower the rubber, so you'll be fine most of the time. Safety is one element that Volkswagen hasn't stripped out of this monochrome because it comes standard with Volkswagen's whole suite of active systems, that you'd expect from a modern semi-luxury SUV. It gets things like adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring, just to name a few, and as is the case with all Volkswagen safety systems, they're very unintrusive and nice to use. I haven't actually found any issue in how the safety systems operate, and they seem very confident in what they do, but my one little issue I have, well, it's not really an issue, it's just an iffy element, is when you're first trying to activate adaptive cruise control on the road, you can find yourself pressing all the different buttons on this side of the steering wheel that should in theory activate it, but almost every time I'm met with a little message, ACC deactivated, which is a little frustrating, but owners will probably get used to it and you'll work it out in no time. As a whole, Volkswagen Australia's Tiguan Allspace Monochrome isn't just a very smart solution for a dire situation, but is a well-appointed and genuinely impressive mid-sized SUV. Sure, you probably can't get it in your favourite colour, well, unless you're the gloomy type, and it does make do with manual cloth seats, whereas leather-powered seats are always nicer, but hey, that's not the end of the world anyway. But as a whole, it's well appointed, it has all the mod cons and the practicality to transport you and your whole family in perfect comfort. But anyway, let me know what you think of this Tiguan Allspace Monochrome in the comments down below, and while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.